Significant is more than $100.
Yes.
Thank you, Ken.
Please turn off your phones or other electronics. Sanny Nutter was born April 12 in Winnipeg, Canada. She grew up and went to school in Winnipeg and Montreal. At the age of 24, she set out to explore the world, traveling with friends on a merchant ship to Europe. They explored Europe and the British Isles, doing a lot of hitchhiking. Not today. Sanny continued her adventures with a move to South Africa, where she lived for 2 years. She then returned to Canada and worked as a stockbroker for 2 years in Toronto. A job loss led to a move to Kalamazoo. Why Kalamazoo? Perhaps she will tell us. At WMU, she learned a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in educational leadership. An American, Canadian, and British citizen, Sanny has planted her roots firmly in Kalamazoo. She worked as a program director for the YWCA. During that time, she became active in women's affairs and social justice. She then became an independent financial advisor, working with IDS, American Express, and Commonwealth Brokers. Sanny moved to Friendship Village, Kalamazoo, June 16, 2020, and is busy with many Friendship Village activities. Some of these activities include exploring prejudices, interplay, volleyball, election absentee ballots, Wake Up World, styrofoam recycling, and Afghan resettlement team. Please welcome your neighbor and friend, Sanny Nutter, who will present HERstory 101. Sanny?
Before we start, I do want us all to give a hand to Allie, who has been doing 2 full-time jobs these last few weeks and has really kept things going on around here. And we owe her a great debt of gratitude. Thank you, Allie. In the Villager, this said history. It is not his, it's mine, it's hers. I beg your pardon, we've got our first heckler here. I'm glad to hear it. I'm going to start way back in the 1800s. My great-grandmother was, this is Alice Maxwell, my great-grandmother. She was born in 1842 in Jamaica. Her father was a doctor in Jamaica. He was Scottish. He traveled from Scotland to Jamaica to study yaws. Yaws was a disease that afflicted black people, and it ate away at the jaw of the face until the entire face was gone. So he was studying that. He was also the doctor in his area in Jamaica that took care of the needs of all the people, the blacks, the whites, the Indians, all the people who lived in there, the whole population. He was very well respected. He married a woman called Anne Clark Giscombe. Anne Clark Giscombe's father was also from Scotland, and he was a medical doctor. That's how my great-grandmother's father knew Anne Clark was through her father, the two doctors getting together, and there was this woman, Anne Clark. And that was the history that I knew as a child. We also had heard stories from my mother and her two sisters during the years between 1910 and 1920. There were stories of black women coming up from Jamaica and going to nursing school. And my great-grandmother, Alice Maxwell, was arranging for these women to come up and go to nursing school, and she was paying for their passage and their schooling. And they were living in my grandmother's house, doing housework for my grandmother while they were there and studying. And so we knew this, and that was kind of a nice thing for our family to know. It sort of made we were making some sort of reparation, we felt, for the awful history of the white people in Canada who had slaves, who were through the generations, who were part of the British Empire that had created colonialism that had hurt so many nations around the world. And so we felt pretty good about it. But there was a secret that was being kept from us. And my cousin, Susan, who's my age, I'm 80, she began doing our genealogy around 1967, and she began to find out more and more about our family. And what she found out was that Anne Clark Biscom, my great-grandmother, Alice's mother, was a free woman of color. That's what it says on the books in Jamaica, that she was a free woman of color. And here, my great-grandfather, James Maxwell, had married her. So now I understood that there was some black in my family, which I was very delighted about, because I've always felt I wanted to be a citizen of the world. And so now I feel that I am, because now I've got some black blood in me, not much by this time, for sure. But the whole family wasn't interested in that. My grandmother did not want the family to talk about this. She didn't want them to know about it. Well, in 1994, my cousin phoned me and she said she had more information. And we began to understand who these black women are. These are women who were at my grandfather's farm, my great-grandfather's farm in Winnipeg, south of Winnipeg. These are the women I was talking about. And these women happen to be my great-grandmother's nieces and grandnieces. Those were the people they were our family coming up to Winnipeg to go to nursing school. And my grandmother had not wanted anyone to know about it, and so it was silenced. But then Susan, my cousin, found it when she put all the pieces together with the names and the statistics from Jamaica. She put everything together, and here are some of my relations in between 1910 and 1920. So that's part of my history. Another thing that I know about my great-grandmother's mother, Anne Clark, the woman of color, was that she did own slaves, and when in her will, I read her will, it says that she had 2 slaves at that point, and those slaves were a mother and a daughter, and they were to be sold together, they were not to be separated. So that's another piece of information that I have. I don't have a whole lot more, but I've got a lot of time to do some more investigation. That's that story, and I told it at the beginning because sometimes when I'm doing my rehearsal with this, I forget about it or not do it at all, and I think it's an important piece for you to know. So now I'm going back to the beginning. My name is Cecilia Ann Nutter. I'm called Sanny for short. My birthday was on April the 12th, 1942. My father's birthday was on April the 12th, 1918. And my grandmother's birthday was on April the 12th, 1872. So I thought my mother did a pretty good job of planning to give my father and my grandmother a really nice present for their birthdays. But it didn't stop there. My mother became pregnant with my brother. My grandfather's birthday was on March 15th, and my brother was due, and my grandfather said to my mother, "Beware the Ides of March," so she had Christopher on the 14th of March. So that's how my grandparents got their 2 grandkids. Okay, Now I'm going to start talking. Over on the left of the screen is me, and then in the middle, holding the little boy's hand, is me with my little brother, Christopher, and then that's my cousin Susan, who does the genealogy, and her brother Jimmy. So that's us when we were little. My father was a navigator during World War II in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and so he knew a lot about the stars. And when I was 8 years old, we were sitting at the dining room table to start talking about the stars. And after dinner was over, he drew this map for us, for me, to show the stars. And then he said, okay, let's get dressed and go outside. It was February in Winnipeg. It was 40 degrees below zero, which is typical in the winter, but we dressed for it. And we went outside and stood on the front lawn, and he showed us the sky, my brother and me. And it was so magnificent, and I felt so wonderful and so honored, and so to have a father who could do this kind of thing. He was a very smart man. He became a writer. So I've saved that. So it's 72 years old. These are school pictures of me. I'm in the middle, next to the tallest girl. The picture on the left, I'm to her right. This is hard. With the long hair and the long oval face. There were 10 girls in my class and 25 boys. This is grade 4, which was highly unusual. And this is a picture of me when I think I was 7, and I think it was Sunday because of the way I'm dressed. Okay, that gets into Montreal. We're not there yet. I did all my elementary school in Winnipeg, and so I did, and grade 7 and 8 as well, and then we moved to Ottawa. I loved Winnipeg. I loved Lake Winnipeg. We went up to the cottage all summer. We had a cottage right on Lake Winnipeg. It was my grandfather's. So I was swimming there. I loved all the winters. I loved especially when we had blizzards. And my friend Marilyn and I would go tobogganing and skiing down on the hill that took us down to the Assiniboine River, which was very close to where we lived. So then, when I was 12, just going on 13, we moved to Ottawa. My father had joined the National Film Board as a documentary film writer, and so we moved to Ottawa. We were only there 8 months because then the film board moved to Montreal. But during that 8 months, I had a really nice life. We lived on a street called Daly, and I used to go down the street to get Rosemary to walk to school, and then Rosemary and I set out, and the Prime Minister of Canada, Lester B. Pearson, would come down his sidewalk and join us. And he walked with us every day until we got up towards Parliament Hill, and he'd go on up to Parliament Hill, and we'd go off this way to York Street School. And I felt like a very important person. There was a boy that lived across the street. His name was Paul Martin, and his father was the Premier of Ontario. And it's that was a nice deal, but he was very nerdy. However, he did grow up and become Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin. So then on the other famous person that I met while I was there was Rich Lill. Do you remember the impersonator? He used to be on Ed Sullivan a lot. Well, he went to the YOU club on Friday nights. That was a Roman Catholic club that I used to go to dance on Friday nights. And he was there often. And we all knew who he was. He wasn't famous yet. He was quite famous, though, in Ottawa. And I danced with him one night, and I thought that was just the best thing. We then moved to Montreal, and we had some very, very rough times. My father was not able to meet his deadlines. My father was an alcoholic. He didn't meet his deadlines, and he lost his job at the National Film Board, and we had some very, very rough times. My mother went to work. She had never worked before. She was in a province that spoke French. She didn't speak any French. We were living way outside of the city, not outside, but in a suburb. We were 7 miles from downtown, and you had to go downtown. Anyway, she didn't know how to get a job, so I said, I will show you. We opened up the newspaper, I showed her the help wanted ads. She looked, and I found one for Sears, and they were looking for someone in the accounting department. I said, Mom, you go and apply for this job. So she did. I told her how to take the buses downtown. She did that. She went down, she got the job, and she had to ask for an advance. She had no money and we had no food. And she did that. I think that must have been a very mortifying experience for my mother. But she said when she got the job, I have to ask you another question. I have 2 children, I have no food at home, and I have no money. May I have an advance? And the man said yes. And that just it seems so wonderful, and it seems so brave and courageous of her. And I think that at that point, my respect for my mother just grew immensely, and it never faltered from then on. Finally, I said to my mother that I didn't want to stay if my father was going to be part of the family. He would leave for months and we would be evicted. We got evicted about 17 times in Montreal. And I said to her, I don't want to stay if this is going to happen, if you're going to have Dad stay here. She said, nope. She said, he can go and we'll stay. And so we went through the eviction. We had a flight in the night. We moved all the furniture. She found a new apartment, and that was that. And I didn't see my father or hear from him again until I came back from South Africa, which was 7 years later. And I saw him at a bar in Toronto, sitting across. I was going to have lunch there. And I saw my father sitting across the room. And I went over and spoke to him, and then we rekindled a relationship. But he had not gotten in touch with us at all. Anyway, once we had moved to our new apartment, I got a job at Bell Telephone. That was my first job really out of high school. I had been working at the Five and Dime and running a paper route and babysitting. But I got a job at Bell Telephone. From there I went on to Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet does credit checks for small companies and big companies. I met a guy who sold mutual funds, and he got me interested in selling mutual funds, and I started giving him leads because I knew from Dun & Bradstreet reports that I was filing who had money, and we were looking for small businesses that had between $10,000 and $25,000 available for investment. And so I would notify Al about this, and if he made a sale, he paid me 10%. So I had a little business on the side going there. Well, finally I met 2 South African girls. Well, I'd known them for a while, but they wanted to go back to South Africa, but they had not been to Europe. So we decided that the 3 of us should go to Europe, hitchhike around Europe, and then go on to South Africa. The plan was then Australia, South America, back up the west coast of America to Canada and home again. That didn't happen. We did get to South Africa. In South Africa, having traveled around Europe all over hitchhiking, having a wonderful time. In South Africa, I sold mutual funds and then life insurance, and I did very, very well while I was there. I came home from South Africa and then got into stockbroking. I think I should back up and tell you a little bit about South Africa, because it was very interesting what happened from the time we got on the plane to go. Norma and I, the third person with us, had gone ahead to South Africa. Norma and I got on a plane in Switzerland, and we were going to fly to Leopoldville and then on to South Africa, or on to Johannesburg. And when we got on the plane, there was 2 black seamen sitting next to me. Norma was sitting behind me. And so it was hot. It was really hot. They had on trench coats, and they were seamen. The plane was full of them. They were seamen from a merchant ship from South Africa that had gone to Greece and didn't have a cargo to take home with them, so they were now going to have to fly home. So these 2 guys were sitting next to me, And I said to them, take off your coats, it's way too warm. And they said, oh, no, Mrs., it's fine. And I said, no, you must take off your coats. Well, finally they took their coats off, folded them very, very neatly, and I put them up in the bin. Sat down, then lunch was served. We all had lunch, very nice. And then, of course, everybody fell asleep. And then the guy on the other side of the aisle to me poked me. And I said, yes. And he said, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, what? He said, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, what are you talking about? You shouldn't have put the coats up. And I said, why not? He said, you'll learn. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you'll learn. So that was that. We did have an incident on in Leopoldville. When we landed in Leopoldville, it was night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. It was so dark, they turned all the lights in the airplane off. We were all going to be taken off the plane while they gassed it up and taken off the back of the plane. I started laughing because I think things like this are so silly when they happen. And Norma was saying, sorry, hanging onto the back of her shoulder, Sanny, stop laughing. Sanny, stop laughing. Anyway, we got to come down the steps of the plane, and here was a cordon of soldiers with bayonets, standing with their bayonets like this. This whole cordon that we had to, right from here to the end of the kiva, that we had to walk through with all these bayonets over our heads. So I thought that was really, really silly, and laughed. Anyway, we went into the airport to wait while it gassed up. They, of course, separated us. The blacks went in one direction, the coloreds went in another direction, the Asians went into another, the Indians, the Jews, and then the whites. So that was how that's how they divided people up back in the 60s, in parts of Africa that I was in. Anyway, we got back on the plane. We landed in South Africa, and Norma's sister-in-law, Zan, met us. She had a nice little Metropolitan car. And on the way home, she had to stop for gas. And so we stopped for gas. And a young black man came running out and came up to the car, and he said, yes, Mrs. And she said, shut up, you black bastard. And I did that. I did what you just did. I said, Zan, what did he do? She said, you'll learn. So now I'm starting to hear this term is echoing. So I said afterwards, really, what did he do? And she said, he was rude. And I said, but what? Well, I wasn't told. The following day, I started working at Nestle's as a data punch clerk. Zan had got me a job there in Johannesburg. And I was sitting at my desk doing my work, and my boss was sitting over to the left of me at her desk doing her work. She was white. And a black man walked in with a great pile of computer sheets. You know those big computer sheets that we used to have years ago, piles, and they fold this way and this way? Well, he came in with this, and he went over to her desk, and he put it down, and she said, thank you, and then she said, do such and such, and he said, just now, Mrs., and she stood up, slapped him across the face. So he went off, and I said to her, what did he do? And she said, you'll learn. There it was again. So then I went on my coffee break, and there were two other women in the room, and we were sitting in a lounge that went around like this, and there was a big coffee table, and there was a Life magazine lying on the table with a dead Biafran man lying on the front page. Do you remember Biafra and all the people who got that disintended large tummy? Well, that was a photograph on the Life magazine, and it was lying there, and I'm talking to the girls, and then one of the girls picks up the magazine, throws it at me, and says, you want to sleep with that? And I hadn't said anything. And I just was astounded at this, my first day. I mean, I'm not even there 24 hours, and I've had all this stuff that I've never, ever I've never heard of before. I've never been witness to anything like this before. So anyway, finally I went on. Oh, I know that same day I was meeting Norma at the park for lunch. And she said, meet me in the center of the park. So I went over to the park, and on the park gate it said Europeans only. So I thought, well, there must be another gate. So I thought, yeah, so I walked down to the other gate, it said Europeans only too. So I walked around to the end, same thing. So I just waited out here at this end of the gate, because it said Europeans only, and I thought Norma would be out sometime soon. And got home that night, and she said, where were you? I said, well, I got there, but I couldn't find a gate for me to go in because it said Europeans only. I said, where were you? She said, I was in the center of the park. You are European. I said, no, I'm not. I'm Canadian. So there was those differences. I tried to get on a streetcar one day, but it was for blacks only. And I said, well, it doesn't matter to me if it doesn't matter to you. They said, no, it's against the law, madam, for you to get on. So I really learned a lot very quickly. I had 2 servants with my apartment. One came with it, the man who did the floors. He polished the floors every day, and he cleaned the bathrooms, and he did that kind of thing. And then I had a woman who came from down the street. She worked for a family and lived with the family during the week. She came down to do my laundry. In the morning she made tea and toast, and in the evening she came in and prepared the vegetables. My apartment had locks on everything. The kitchen, every single cupboard in the kitchen had a lock on it. The refrigerator had a lock, and the freezer had a lock. It was ridiculous, the fear. And then out back there was a fence that had broken glass all along. It was a high fence, had broken glass, and now they use that steel curly early stuff. I was back in 1992 and saw that. A lot of people have doors that look like jail doors on the front. There, you can see through, the air can go through, so that you open the front door when somebody knocks, and there's this jail door, so that if it's someone that you don't want in, they can't get in. It's a different kind of a place to live in. It's one obviously dominated by fear. So anyway, I did really well with my selling mutual funds in South Africa. And I finally had enough money so that I could buy a 3-bedroom ranch house with a swimming pool, a proper sized swimming pool, and a tennis court. I had cash to buy all that, could buy it in 1968 for $20,000 cash, would pay everything. That could not happen here in 1968. You couldn't do that. So you understand the difference when you see the apartheid versus our democratic system, where we say that people are equal, but there's still a control, as you know. But it was horrifying to me to look at what happened. And I couldn't stay either because I couldn't speak. When I said anything, people would say, you can be put under house arrest for what you just said. And I didn't say much. People would say, what do you think of apartheid? And I would say, well, I don't really know anything about it, but it just doesn't seem right to me. And so then a man came up to me the first night I was there at a party and said, you have said too much, you could be picked up and put in jail. And at that time, there was a Jewish woman who was under house arrest, and she was just going to be released. She'd been under house arrest for 5 years when I arrived, and she came out of house arrest. She went down the street, and they arrested her again because they knew she was an activist, put her back in for 5 years more in house arrest. And I saw her finally released 7 years after I had left South Africa. So that was 1975 she got released. So what was going on was really horrendous. And I'm glad that things there are much changed. I have been back. And when I was back in 1992, it was like being back in the honeymoon period. and you saw lots of blacks and whites walking together, and lots of people holding hands, and people of color holding hands, and people of color and white people holding hands. And so it seemed very nice, but then things, when the honeymoon was over, then things got bad again, and I think there's problems, probably similar to what we have in our own country, of trying to get the races to come together in a very peaceful, ordinary way. When I returned from South Africa, I went to Toronto, became a stockbroker, and there were 21 in our class, 20 men and me, and the guys were from all over Canada, large cities as well as small towns. I was from Toronto. We were at the home office and we got our training and we worked there. So we were working all day and sometimes in classes during the day, and then we studied at night. And finally, we got our licenses to practice as stockbrokers. And I was doing quite nicely. I was at the top of the whole group across Canada. I was second in the whole group. So I was doing nicely, and it was time for us to get raises in our commissions. And they said, well, now all we need are your transcripts from university. And I said, I haven't been to university. And they said, well, then you don't get a raise. And so everybody else got a raise in their commissions, and I didn't. And it was a 1% raise, so I thought, it's nothing. So it didn't bother me. But when it happened the second time, they got a 3% raise and I didn't get anything. So I woke up and I decided that what I needed to do was get a degree. So I thought, well, I'm in Ontario, I'll go to a college town like Kingston or Queenston. I'm not going to stay in a big city. So I went to, I was thinking about going down to interview at both those schools. And a friend of mine from Kalamazoo was coming up here, or was coming up to Toronto. She was going to stay with me for the weekend because she was going up to open her cottage on the Georgian Bay. So there she was, and she said, you know, we went out for dinner, and she said, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm leaving stock brokerage, I have to go and get a degree, and I'm thinking of going somewhere in Ontario. And she said, why not come to Kalamazoo and go to Western Michigan University? And I said, I think that's a fine idea. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. So I came down here. I don't think I mentioned I haven't graduated from high school yet. So I went to see the registrar. And said that I wanted to come to school and study special education, which I thought I wanted to do. And he said, fine. He said, I need to see your high school transcripts. I said, I don't have any. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I haven't graduated yet. I had some problems back then and failed grade 10 twice and grade 11 once. And then I was 19, so they told me to leave. And he said, well, then how do you expect to get in here? What do you think I'm going to do for you? And I said, well, I'll make a deal. I said, I will take a full load of classes for one semester. I will take 14 hours, okay? And I will get 4 A's. That's 4 classes, and that's 4 A's. And he said, tell you what, you get 3 C's and a B, and I'll let you in. Oh, and it's 12 hours. And I said, deal. And we shook on it. And I delivered the 14 and 4 A's. So then I was here. I loved Western. I loved going to school. I loved my classes. I became part of the international committee and did some work with the international students. We were represented, I think, by somewhere around 23 countries at that time, including Asia, Africa, Australia, South America, and of course Europe. So I was in my element, and then I worked in the dorm as an RA, so I got my room and board that way. And I did some babysitting. I worked in the library. That gave me some cash. I got a lot of grants and scholarships because I had no money. So I got myself through school that way. Did my bachelor's and my master's in 4 years. I also worked on the Affirmative Action Committee at Western Michigan University. That was my first big committee that I worked on. I was very proud to serve on the Affirmative Action Committee, and I believe firmly in affirmative action. And then there was a women's commission developed to study sexism at Western, and I became part of that committee. I was the student representative for that committee, and I became the spokesperson for that committee. That committee was made up of women from the student body all the way up to the top professors, with the custodians, the clerical people, the technical people, everybody, all women. We did studies of all the departments to find out what was going on, and we found that the salaries were not in line with the salaries of the men by a large group. I'll tell you one thing in particular. There was a woman who was in charge of the paint department, the department that painted all of the campus. You know, that's a huge job. Just a huge job. You know what it's like, they're always painting here. She was the manager of that department. She trained her whole staff, and she did painting herself. And she was getting about 59 cents on the dollar compared to the men. And she was doing the administrative, the task, the training, the teaching, everything. So they did get that straightened around eventually. But that was a terrible example of how bad things were. People's pensions, there was women's pensions that were not in accord with comparable to the men's pensions. And so there was a Hayes study done. I think that it took about 6 years to go through the Hayes study, and finally there were reparations made all over the board. Some of the things have fallen back now. Wages are still not comparable to men's. And so and I think we know that across the board that wages are still not comparable. We're somewhere around 80 to 85% in the country. So we're getting there, but we've got to keep on working on that. So I was the one that went with another woman to talk to the president. That was Jim Miller at the time. They chose me because I was a student and I couldn't get fired. There was a great fear among women that they could be fired if they spoke out on this issue. So there was a great amount of fear. So I went to speak. I went with another woman who was in a lower level job. So she could get a job somewhere else if anything happened. She wasn't going to lose tenure or anything. Give me a minute. I got 5 minutes. I'm getting there though. Anyway, we went to see him, Mary Fran Fenton and I, and he was so welcoming. We went into his office. His desk was over there. He came up to the front where he had a lovely sofa for us to sit on, and a coffee table, and a couple of occasional chairs, and we sat there and we had a lovely chat. And he said, I want you to do some things, and he gave us a list of tasks to do and come back in 2 weeks. And we said, fine, off we went. And Mary Fran said, Sanny, he was so nice. He's all in favor of this, and this is so great. And I said, no, that was our first meeting. We have a second meeting. It will be totally different. And she said, oh, no, it won't. Anyway, we went and we got the commission, Women's Commission, to do the work. We went back in 2 weeks. We walked in, and I said to Mary Fran, we're walking along, she said, Sanny, this is going to be easy. He's so in favor of us, and so we walked into and I said, no. I said, follow me, do what I do. This is going to be different. So we walked into the office, and I stopped. He was over behind his desk, standing. There was one chair in front of his desk, just a straight back regular chair, not two. And he said, come on over and sit down, ladies. So I stood, and Mary Fran went over and sat down. So there she was sitting, and he talked, and I talked, and he said, come on over here, Sanny. So I walked over, and so we stood and talked, and he talked about fishing. And he talked about fishing for about 10 minutes, and then I said, you know, I think we need to be moving on. And so he started talking about his bridge game the night before. So he did that for 10 minutes, and I said, you gave us half an hour, you've used up 20 minutes of it. And he said, yes, and you have to be gone in 10 minutes because I have another appointment coming in. And I said, no, we're not going to do it that way. You're going to give us another appointment, and you're going to meet with us and listen to us and give us our full half hour. And so he said, okay. And he did like me, because he liked that I held my ground and that I was fair. I was being fair with him. And so, anyway, finally we got everything organized. And our lawyer, who was from Lansing, Jean King, put everything together, and she said, we're going to have this class action lawsuit against the university, and we're going to talk to the President's Council. It was a council of about 30 men that sat at a round table. I was there, and Aline Dietrich was there, and then the President's Council was there. The morning that we were having this meeting, the Detroit Free Press came out with headlines, WMU sued for sexism, was the headline, and the lawyer had engineered that. She did not want it to come out in the Kalamazoo paper because she wanted the state coverage, and we got it. So then the study was done and recompense started, and at this point, I don't know how many millions, over $200 million in reparations have been paid out to try to find fairness for women within the university, students included. So that was the end of that story. I then graduated, became a financial planner. I became a CFP. All the people in my district became CFPs. That was part of our claim to fame, was that we said everyone had to be a certified financial planner. I wanted people to be the top notch that they could be, and I wanted them to constantly have ethics and morality in front of their faces, so they did. I had a wonderful career. I had 23 clients come here. I started, I'll tell you one story. The first time I came here, I was a financial planner then, and I came to see a woman named Margaret Brunson. She was 94 years old, and I came at 9:30 in the morning, and I called her on the phone to make the appointment. She came out at 9:30 in the morning, a tall, beautiful woman, thin, with a lovely gray, yellow grayish slacks on, silk, I think, with a perfect crease down, and a lovely silk crepe blouse with a high collar, earrings, her hair done gorgeously, her makeup. And she came and we shook hands, and we're walking back to her apartment, and I said, I hope this isn't too early for you, 9:30 in the morning. She said, oh no, I've been to my exercise class, and then I went home and showered and got dressed. So this has to be the place. That's what really inspired me, was my first visit here. I said, so then I started talking about this, and I started getting clients here, sending clients. 23 of my clients moved in here. Several are still here. So then I knew where I was coming. And I did a full study of all the senior places available for all financial groups. I knew some of my clients would end up on Medicaid, so I even did research on where the best Medicaid facilities were. So I did a full range and was able to say to people, this is the place that I think you should be looking at. And I was very, very pleased that I had done that work, because it was so necessary, and I didn't really understand that until I met Margaret Brunson and understood that, yeah, something happens and we all end up coming here if we can, and it's the best place to be. Let me just go through and see if I have any other nugget I want to share with you. Oh yes, I didn't click through some of these, so let me go. This is my graduation picture. I didn't go to graduation. That's my prom. That's me on this side, and Bob Atkinson and Betty Dykes and Bob Anderson. This is a glamour day. I was going to one of my Jewish friends' weddings. That's a glamour shot somewhere around 1962. That's somewhere in the 80s, another glamour shot, just to let you know that I can do that. This is in Scotland in 1964 when I first went over with Norma. This is my great grandfather's house where my grandmother was born. And that's me standing out in front of the house. That's a piece of it. This is my mother when we went in 1988, standing down against the wall, and you can see the full measure of the house. There was a beautiful barns behind, all stone with Spanish tiles. It was wonderful. We've all been into the house. My cousins, my mother's sister, Mom and me, so we're all familiar with it. We've met the family. Oh, International Women's Year. I was still on campus, 1975. The Women's Commission, we now had a Women's Center on campus at Western, and we decided that we were going to go to International Women's Year in Mexico City, and I led the group. There were 45 of us that went to this. It was the NGO meetings that were going on there, and we were allowed to go to those meetings. I wanted to have a large group because I knew 45 was not a large group, but I thought that New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, I felt like they were going to have 1,000 people. We had the largest group there, which I'm very, very proud of. But that was the symbol that was used. And that's me in the blue jacket down there. And that's me standing on top of a pyramid in the orange jacket. And I'm not in there, but there was tons of women. We met all kinds of people there. We met all kinds of representatives from all over the world. Flo Kennedy from here, and the one with the big hat, I can't remember names, but all those wonderful black women that we had back in the 60s and 70s who were making waves, they were all going on. This is a picture of my family in 1994. My father, this is out in British Columbia. My father lived out in British Columbia, finally. I found him out there again. I'd lost him after I found him in 1976, 1976, and then I lost him. No, 1968 I found him, and then I lost him in 1976, and I found him again in 1994, I think it is. It's my brother, who's 5 years younger than me, my mother, and me. And we had a very nice time out there. My father died in 1996. And my mother died in 2011. My dad was 78 years old. He died the alcoholic's death, which is a terrible death. And I was told what happened, and I took the whole family out for his funeral in Vancouver, which was in north of Vancouver, where he lived. And that's that. My mother wrote a poem, which I really, really like. This is a good poem. She is the most amazing person that I ever met. She's the one who instilled in me the kind of attitude that I have. She said, I asked her why she was always so cheerful. She said, it takes less energy. So I want to read the poem to you. I am the child who slept in the tall grass and was lost. Say a prayer as you pass. I am the pupil who asked questions in school and was told they were irrelevant, against the rule. I am the singer who sang like a lark rising at dawn. Still I sing, but at night in the dark. I am the actress who felt the elation that follows the shock of a standing ovation. The woman I am is still as naive as a child. What you say I am bound to believe. I am the mother who knows very well, change the past one iota. You never can tell, my children might vanish, and that would be hell. Ann Nutter, 1973, and I dedicate this talk to her. Thank you. Yes, I'm part of a First Presbyterian Church resettlement team for an Afghani family that moved here on December 24th last year. First Presbyterian has sponsored a family before. 6 years ago they sponsored a Syrian family, and this year when all the Afghan problem was going on, we decided to sponsor a family, and I became part of it because of my financial background, and I work on the financial team. You remember the day we saw last August, the August of 2021, of people running in the plane leaving with people hanging on the plane? Well, the father of our group, Noor Zamin Salarzai, left that day to come to America. He was taken from Afghan to Qatar, to Italy, to New Jersey, to Kalamazoo. His family, his wife and 5 children, left the following week and came the same route, and everybody ended up here in Kalamazoo December 24th last year. And they were housed. Bethany Christian Church is organized to do all the beginning part of getting people, refugees, over here, getting their paperwork done, getting some of the medical work done that has to be done in order for them to come into the country. And they organized for him to get a job. He got a job with Summit Polymers and has recently transferred over to Upjohn Company. The family has now moved into a house that one of the members of the church bought. He's renting that house. He has a new baby was born. The new baby is an American citizen. So now there's 6 kids. There's 1 girl, the oldest, and then all the boys. The mother had the first baby when she was 12. The father was 16 at the time. And now she's 28 and has 6 children. But the children are all spaced 2 or 3 years apart, which is, so there's something going on that is organized. The mother and the father are delightful people. The children are so warm and friendly, and when I go over, they always get tea. The girls and the boys will go and make the tea and maybe get some cookies out, and then they serve me. The children will come and serve me. When I've been over there when the children are in school, the mother makes bread. Lovely, big round bread, puts it in the oven, and then I get this gorgeous bread, and she makes beautiful soup or sometimes some kind of a meat with a sauce on it. So they're doing very well. The kids are in school. They're learning English. The children, of course, are way ahead of the parents. The mother understands some of the English, but she doesn't speak yet. And the father is starting to speak quite a lot of English. So we're very, very happy to be working with them. Anything else? Thank you.
Well, another example of the diamonds living at Friendship Village. And please don't hesitate to volunteer yourself or let me know of a diamond living close to you that could give another life story. Next month, November 2nd, our program will be Jay Parsons speaking on 18 months PhD research in a rural Philippines barrio. Look forward to November 2nd.